Speaking of Singapore, this country is viewed as a small but populous island, which is highly diverse in terms of ethnicity, languages, and so on. It is undeniable that its historical background is instrumental in its progress today, especially during the 1800s, during the period that colonialism and imperialism were on the rise, dominating the Southeast Asian region, and Singapore is no exception. It had been ruled by the British Empire for around 142 years, with long periods of time under the rule of British. Singapore was surely imbibed by merits of what the British had done to the country, and inherited from education, science, modernity, and a lot more, which can be seen today. However, as a colonized country, advantages were not only what Singapore was granted. Like other countries, it was faced with form of exploitation by the ruler, which was in power and colonial administration. Dating back to the period when Britain had dominion over Singapore, it was Sir Thomas Stamford Raffles who colonized the country in 1819 until the invasion of Japan during World War II. After the end of World War II, Singapore was back under British rule again, but it was excluded from Malayan Union and subsequently formed the Federations of Malayas as a separate cow colony, after having been combined as the Straits Settlement with Penang and Malacca. In 1959, Singapore became a self-governing country under British control in the matter of defense and foreign policy by the People's Action Party, led by Lee Kuan Yew. Later on, Singapore joined Federations of Malaysia in 1963 in hope of gaining independence from British Empire. However, there were political frictions and radical conflicts between the two countries' leaders, so Singapore was expelled from Malaysia in 1965. On August 9, 1965, Singapore was therefore given independence from Malaysia and became the Republic of Singapore as in these days. Also, in 1967, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, and Singapore was one of the founding countries. In 1990, after Singapore had long been governed by Lee Kuan Yew, Goh Chok Tong succeeded Lee Kuan Yew as Prime Minister in 1990. During Goh's tenure in office, the country's economic outlook was desirable, before being critically affected by the Asian financial crisis of the late 1990s. Still, Singapore managed to resume its growth in early 2000s. After Goh's resignation from office, Lee Hsien-loong, Lee Kuan Yew's son, was the Prime Minister as expected. Although Lee appeared to relax some laws against dissenter and approve of freedom of expression, he filed lawsuits against dissenter. This is another reason why Singapore is dubbed to have flawed democracy, causing disapproval among many other countries. However, Singapore relations with the neighboring countries improved in the 21st century. In the economic aspect, the port founded by Raffles, the colonizers, is the most evident and precious legacy the British gave Singapore, having paved the way to Singapore's big success so far. Since Singapore offers free ports, it allows other countries to use its port, free taxes, and levy fees, facilitating the world's market and multinational corporations. Also, the British operated Singapore as an open economy, welcoming investment from other countries. Such an idea has permeated Singapore to date. This clearly points out Singapore's competitive economies and its free trade, which results in the country's huge success. Despite its small size and lack of valuable resources like other Southeast Asian countries, although such growth resulted from the process of assimilation, considering its positive effects, it is worth abiding by the way British ruled the country. From an originally impoverished country, with such factor mainly because of British as well as Singaporeans' entrepreneurial trade, Singapore managed to be one of the wealthiest nations in the world by 1990s, owing the highest GDP in Asia except for Japan. Politically, since Singapore was under British rule, it of course benefited from British political system, or collectively known as the Westminster model. With British officials in charge, in general, it seemed positive because Singapore was given help and support from the British to run a colony. Nevertheless, the Governor-General, who was responsible for administering the countries, was unelected, meaning that no true democracy was proven. Those who definitely criticized the parliament would be punished or even banished. Also, the political hierarchy was seen in Singaporean politics, particularly during imperialism, with the president at the top of the hierarchy and the head of the state, and the prime minister at the head of the government. One last thing, it is undeniable that English is another legacy resulting from British rule, functioning as an administrative language and a medium of instruction in schools. Moreover, Singaporeans' proficiency in English is also a key factor that prompts investment from a number of companies to establish their office in Singapore, due to the fact that English is used in commerce and business. In the social aspect, upon the arrival of European power, the white became the first-class citizens, and the Eurasians were second-class citizens. And sure enough, native people became the third-class citizen. Due to Eurocentric point of view, such racist perspective permitted the civil service, the police force, sport, and even the social clubs, which were exclusively for white people. The worst case is that some were abused and enslaved. When it comes to colonialism, it was in general associated with Christianity propagation. Catholic schools and missionaries attempt to turn native people into Christian. However, the British government decided not to interfere with Singapore religion, keeping the Church of England off the colonial policy. Another value derived from the British is that Singaporeans are multicultural, welcoming anyone or anything from every part of the world. On top of that, Singaporean people strongly believe that Western provide them with new points of view, which are worth adhering to. Interesting fact about Singapore. After presenting you with historical and political information, as well as insight into Singapore, let me provide you with some interesting facts you might have never known before about this country. Considering the name of Singapore, you might learn that it is associated with lions. The name of this country might have been derived from something related to lions. Of course, legends had it that Sumatran prince visited Termasaks and witnessed a lion-like beast. He believed it was considered a good omen for him to establish Singapura, which evolved to be Singapore. As mentioned at the beginning of the presentation that Singapore is an island, of course, it is one of 3 city-states in the world. The other 2 are Monaco and Vatican City. On top of that, as Singapore is actually a culturally diverse country in many aspects, including languages, Singapore has 4 official languages: English, Malay, Mandarin, and Tamil. Thanks to its historical background in certain contexts, such as colonizations and immigration, English functioned as the main medium for administrations, commerce, and industry, and the medium of instruction in school. Mandarin or Chinese is spoken in Singapore because Chinese people predominate the country, resulting from past immigration. Malay is viewed as a national language. Since English and Malay are what Singapore and Malaysia have in common, they played a role in building a strong tie between the two. Plus, Singapore is linked by rail to Peninsular Malaysia at Johor. In conclusion, considering Singapore's historical background, the British Empire as a colonizer is undeniably instrumental in forming how Singapore is both in a positive and negative manner. Despite several negative consequences from imperialism, it is obvious that not only Singapore is still remarkably competitive, but is also significantly benefit from the British, endowed with tremendous legacy such as economy, trade, languages, politics, to name but a few.
Now, let's move on to Brunei. Brunei began to emerge in world history during the 5th century AD, during which time Brunei was well known among Chinese sailors. As a trading port in the South China Sea, it was known as Bonny. And since then, Brunei has grown as a trade state along the wind when Chinese ships reach the coast of Vietnam. You can rely on the northeast monsoon winds to take you to Brunei. In addition to the historical evidence from China itself, this land is named Bonny as a southern mountain state. Brunei's name also appears as Wijayapura as a tribute state to the Sriwijaya Empire, based on present-day Sumatra in Indonesia. During the 10th century, there was evidence of trade between Bonny and the Chinese Empire during the Song dynasty. And later, in the 14th century, the name Brunei appeared as Brunei, which appears in historical documents called Negara Gertagama. This is a historical document written during the Majapahit period, when the Majapahit kingdom centered on Java was at its supreme power. Then appears to be an annual Betelnut tribute. After Brunei lost Sarawak, Labuan, and Sabah, Brunei became aware of the threat of the British Empire. Thus, on September 17, 1888, Sultan Hashim Alam Agamaddin signed a treaty making Brunei a protectorate of British Empire. The text of the treaty states that Brunei cannot raise or lease any territory in Brunei for other nations without the consent of the British. The British will be in charge of foreign affairs for Brunei, or in other words, Brunei has completely lost its independence to the British. But the treaty did not prevent Brunei from retaining its territory as expected. The White King's kingdoms of Sarawak continued to annex Brunei's island. The British also continued to encourage cities in the Brunei region to stand up to the Brunei Sultanate. In the end, Brunei lost the Limbang region, and the loss of Limbang has left Brunei in tatters until today. The last area Brunei lost to the British was Lawas in 1904, which left Brunei with only 6,000 square kilometers of land. And originally, Brunei had an area of more than 100,000 square kilometers. In 1906, Britain expanded its influence in Brunei by having the Sultan sign a treaty to create a Sultanate Advisory Board. As a result, the British were able to intervene in Brunei's international affairs. From the original, they only intervened in external affairs. But what the British did not intervene in were matters related to Islam. One day, in 1926, two Englishmen named Marriott and Cohen had traveled along a coastal road in Syria to Kuala Belait, in western Brunei. As soon as they rested in the area, their noses felt the smell of crude oil, and they did not hesitate to report that to the Brunei governing body to explore the area. Brunei's luck came when oil drilling was a success. This land is rich in precious natural resources. Before the discovery of large oil fields in Syria, the British began exploring for oil in the Brunei region in 1899, and some oil and gas have also been discovered in the Kuala Belait region. But the amount discovered was not worth the excavation, and the British Malabar Petroleum Company was formed in 1922 for oil exploration in the Brunei region before becoming the Brunei Shell Petroleum Companies. On December 16, 1941, just 8 days after the Japanese invaded Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, Japan deployed 10,000 troops to capture Brunei. And after just 6 days, Japan was able to occupy the whole country of Brunei. It then forced Sultan Edmund to come to the ground and sign a surrender of rule over Japan. During that period, Japan forced civil servants to learn Japanese, and there must also be Japanese teaching in schools. Japan changes its own currency, dubbed duit pisang or banana money. This money has caused inflation and crippled Brunei's economy for a while. At first, the British were unable to defend and protect Brunei because the main troops were sent to help fight in the battle in Europe. But after the war, things on the European side began to calm down. On June 10, British and Allied forces resumed attacks on Japanese positions in Brunei, and on June 10th, Australian forces liberated Brunei from Japanese occupation, causing a fight with Japan. Again, and finally, the Allies were victorious in July 1946. In the period before the Japanese occupation, the Brunei colonial administration, Sarawak and North Brunei, to the Straits settlements, centered on Singapore, in which in the beginning Brunei directly depended on Sarawak again. The 7 delegations or Tujuh Sirengkai, appointed by Sultan Oman Ali Said Fundi III, or the father of the current Sultan, began to survey people's demands for a constitution in July 1953. 6 years later, the Sultan personally traveled to the United Kingdom to meet with the British on the Brunei Constitution. And in the end, England endorses the draft constitution. On September 29, 1959, Sir Robert Scott led the British division. The British commander in charge of Southeast Asia affairs signed a new constitution with the Sultan. In Bandar Seri Begawan, in the aforementioned constitution, there is a joint clause that says that Sultan will serve as the head of the state. The Brunei government will look at and manage the government itself. England will only have powers in terms of protecting Brunei and overseeing foreign affairs. The British residence was abolished and retained only the position of the British embassy. In the context of the entire constitution, this means that Brunei has the right to self-government. The result of the said constitution is that Brunei has now its own legislature, which one branch is appointed by the Sultan and the other half is elected. In the 1962 election, the Brunei People's Party won the most seats in that election. Brunei is facing turmoil from the shaping of nationalism and the building of Malaysia. Before 1962, Britain, Malaya, Singapore, Sarawak, and Sabah began to discuss the establishment of a Federation of Malaysia by combining British colonial territories in the Malaya Peninsula and the Straits of Malacca into a new country, inheriting the layout from the original Malaya Federation. The idea has been strongly opposed by neighboring countries, such as the Philippines and Indonesia. The Philippines claimed rights over the state of Sabah, and Indonesia accused Malaya of being the heir of British imperialism and wanted to expand its influence in the region. The Sultan agreed with Brunei's integration into the Malaysian Federation. But the Brunei People's Party, led by a Sahari, opposes the plan. There was a proposal to bring Brunei to join Sarawak and Sabah to form a new country called Kalimantan Utara, or North Kalimantan, so that Brunei does not fall under the influence of the Malaysia Peninsula, and the Sultan will be the Sultan of the new country. In addition, after a general election in mid-1962, the Brunei People's Party was elected to 16 of the 33 seats and prepared to present a plan to form a new country at the National Assembly. But the Sultan rejected the plan and postponed the opening of the Council until December 5, 1962. The next morning, the Indonesia-backed North Kalimantan National Army, or the Tentara Nasional Kalimantan Utara, caused chaos in the country. The Sultan declared a state of emergency and enlisted the help of British Gurkha troops, until the events finally calmed down, and the Sultan decided not to join the Federation of Malaysia, resulting in the creation of the Federal of Malaysia in 1963 without Brunei. Brunei has returned to developing the country again after a period of turmoil. Brunei has previously started a national development plan in the next year, 1953, focusing on the development of petroleum exploration and production. Education and transportation are important, and a second plan was started in 1962, before the chaos. This plan focuses on the well-being of the people. In 1971, Prince Hassano, or Sultan Oman Ali III, traveled to the United Kingdom for a meeting to discuss Brunei's independence. At the first stage, an agreement was reached that would give Brunei complete autonomy in the administration of state affairs. However, England will continue to provide foreign aid and defenses both at home and abroad. Then there were several other collective agreements. Finally, in May 1983, Britain announced that Brunei would gain full independence the following year. And at midnight on January 1st, 1984, Sultan Oman Ali III read himself the Declaration of Independence. During the post-colonial period, the Sultan's government has continued to focus on improving the quality of life of the people. As soon as Brunei gained independence, Brunei applied for membership in the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, and built the Universities of Brunei Darussalam, which was opened in 1987. Interesting facts about Brunei. The name Brunei Darussalam means abode of peace, which is mostly true given the country's higher standard of living and longer life expectancy. And the average is 75.93 years as of 2020, than many of their neighbors in Southeast Asia. The first time Brunei participated at the Olympic Games was in the year 1988. Weirdly, the delegation was composed of a single official and non-athletes. The first time the nation sent the athletes to compete was in 1996. The country sadly has never won an Olympic medal. Brunei enjoys one of the world's highest standards of living thanks to its steady stream of oil and gas. Brunei's oil and gas reserves produce approximately 127,000 barrels of oil per day and 243,000 barrels of natural gases per day. In fact, most of shale oil come from offshore drilling platforms in Brunei. Brunei is considered to be the most observant Islamic nation in Southeast Asia. Beautiful mosques dot the country. Visitors are welcome inside of mosques, outside at prayer times, and with proper dress. And the sale of public consumption of alcohol is illegal in Brunei, although non-Muslims are allowed to bring up to 2 liters into the country. Now, let's move on to Brunei's true friend, East Timor, or the name that we are familiar with, Timor-Leste. The Portuguese culture that ruled East Timor for more than 500 years has resulted in a less pronounced overall culture. In addition to having a large number of Christian churches, which could be counted as Timor-Leste, the East has the largest church in Southeast Asia. It was constructed in October 1989 by Pope John Paul II to perform religious ceremonies. But it also appears that there are some groups that respected the spirits and lived in a house of wealth. Two wives in the same household, each village has a location. It is to worship sacred things by having a priest or a shaman perform the ceremony. In the 15th century, Portugal was able to build large maritime ships. They succeeded in developing their own navigation in various fields until they became proficiency in navigation and become a sea power at that time. Therefore, they tried to find a sea route to trade in the Indian Ocean until they were able to find a sailing route around the Cape of Good Hope. Later, when Vasco da Gama sailed to the Indian Ocean in 1510, Portugal was the first nation to seek fortune. In order to control Indian trade, the country is expanding its maritime influence in the Indian Ocean by sending troops to capture the city of Goa as the center. In addition, troops were sent to explore the islands of Morocco to find sources of spices. And in 1511, Portugal began to have more influence in the territory and conquered Malacca, which counts as a city. Malacca was the first European colony in the Southeast Asia. Later, the port cities of settlement rebelled. Later, the Malacca Empire's power deteriorated. The Portugal took advantage by intervening in the dispute of power in the Court of Peace. And finally, Portugal was able to capture Peace. But this was resisted until Sultan Aceh drove Portugal out of Malacca. Portugal retained control of the Strait of Malacca in order to prevent other nation trade competitors from taking advantage. In 1513, Portugal expanded its influence by entering into trade with the cities of Ternate and Tidor, after the two cities were in conflict. Portugal took the opportunity to enter and intervene in such problems. As a result, Portugal had to fight with the Sultan of Ternate, resulting in another defeat for Portugal. Therefore, they need to retreat. According to the records of Duarte Barbosa, a Portuguese traveler to Timor in 1518, he said that Timor is rich in sandalwood, which brought wealth to the Muslims and Persians. Portugal established itself in half of the eastern island in 1571. In the year 1870, the port of Lifau was moved to the city of Delhi. Due to the repulsion of the natives by the rulers in 1915, the Portuguese were able to occupy Timor all the way east when the Portuguese ruled over Timor. They could not have developed or promoted. The Timorese people have made progress regardless. There will be political, economic, social, and cultural aspects to Timor. Therefore, they lived below standards and were also exploited in every aspect. Portugal has been born. The new ethnic group is a topaz, or black Portuguese, which is a consequence. As a half-blood between the indigenous people and the Portuguese, this group, as they grow up, is encouraged to become elite, governing the Timorese people in different regions as second-class citizens. While Portugal has more power in the Spice Islands, Holland, having liberated itself from the rule of Spain and renamed the country the Netherlands, later had the ability to develop and strengthen a naval force and has the potential to fight until it expands influence into the territory of the Asian continent. In particular, the territories that were previously colonized by Portugal have taken many territories into their own, including parts of the island of Timor, thereby sparking a conflict between Portugal and the Netherlands. But in the end, they were able to come to an agreement. Under an agreement between Portugal and the Netherlands in 1903, Timor was divided into two territories, with East Timor belonging to Portugal and West Timor to the Netherlands. In 1950, Netherlands gave independence to Indonesia in the following year, but East Timor remained under Portuguese rule until 1975, due to Portugal's withdrawal during World War II. The Southeast Asia region was affected by the years of war. When Japan launched a war in Asia and the Pacific region, including the Java Islands, the Japanese army invaded Eastern Holland Island and was able to land on Borneo in February 1942. Later, Japan sent about 2,000 troops to land at Delhi on the island of Timor. And on December 17, 1942, the Allied forces led by Dutch troops and soldiers from Australia landed on Timor Island, fighting with Japanese soldiers, but the Allied soldiers were unable to fight the Japanese. The Australian troops withdrew from Timor in January 1943.
In the year 1512, or in the 16th century, a Portuguese navigator discovered the island of Timor and occupied the Portuguese colony, after Christopher Columbus discovered America for about 20 years. In 1903, the Netherlands occupied Indonesia and fought with Portugal until an agreement was reached to an end of the conflict, with the Netherlands occupying Western Timor and Portugal with the islands of East Timor. February 3, 1942, at the end of World War II, Japanese troops invaded Delhi and used it as flying bait to send planes to destroy the harbor and airport in Darwin, Australia. East Timor was thus independent until August 15, 1945. And when the Emperor of Japan declared war on the Allies, Timor returned to the rule of Portugal once again. In 1950, the Netherlands liberated Indonesia from colonial rule and seized West Timor to Indonesian control, while Portugal remains control of East Timor. In 1967, the East Timorese people began to move to claim independence from Portugal. On April 25, 1974, the Canadian movement launched a coup in Portugal to overthrow the government, the dictatorship of General Antonio de Oliveira Salazar, who ruled Portugal for 30 years, and transform it into a democratic regime. The effect of change, the political translation, had an impact on the Portuguese colony in different regions. The new Portuguese government decided to liberate the colonies of their own, including East Timor. In September 1974, Mr. Mário Soares, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Portugal, met with Mr. Adam Malik, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Indonesia, at the United Nations office in New York. The two agreed to find a way to use East Timorese to contribute, decide on their own form of governance. It was proposed by the Portuguese side that East Timor should have a vote determine their future in 1975. In November 1974, the new government of Portugal appointed Colonel Lemos Pires as ruler of East Timor, which later allowed the Timorese to establish political parties, resulting in 3 major political parties. Subsequently, on March 31, 1975, Portugal was designated as a vote day for members of the House of Representatives to try to form a government in East Timor, with a committee to rebuild the colony in charge of general elections in East Timor. As a result, the party Fretilin won the election with the 55% of the vote, followed by UDT, which received slightly fewer votes, while Opadsareechai had only 300 supporters, despite receiving considerable funding from Indonesia. In demand for independence of West Timor, it can be divided into three concepts. First, the collaborations with Australia, but it has been rejected by Australia, which prefer the idea of a political party. Second, integration with Indonesia. This is the idea of the UDT party and the Opadsareechai party, which is behind Indonesia. Third, independent succession and self-government, as advocated by the ADT or Fretilin parties. On July 1, 1975, the Portuguese government enacted a law up to have a vote in the General Assembly of East Timor by setting an election date in October 1975. The General Assembly serves to determine the future of East Timor. The situation in East Timor led Indonesia to monitor it. They are constantly moving and trying to find opportunities to intervene in internal affairs of East Timor. Therefore, a special command unit called Operasi Komodo was set up to intervene in East Timor. Indonesia began backing the UDT party in a coup d'etat on August 11, 1975. Timor Fretilin-led regime. This triggered a 3-week civil war in September 1975, killing over 2,000 people and sending many migrant workers to West Timor. Detachment began when the Portuguese personnel retreated to Otaru on December 1975. Portugal's attempt to free Timor failed. Fretilin won and took office. On May 28, 1975, the nation declared independence from East Timor. However, it has yet to be recognized as such. Order up, Indonesians want to intervene in East Timor affairs. A reason to intervene in East Timor? On August 11, 1975, UTD leaders visited Jakarta and staged a coup d'etat. Balibo eliminated forced security in East Timor. Onslaught by Navy and Air Force against Delhi's inhabitants, burning farms and houses among other atrocities on Timorese. It distorted the conflict savagery and the East Timorese people behavior. Indonesian forces aid East Timor, escape from Fretilin's sway. A visit to Indonesia reveals a resurgence in East Timor, the military invasions of East Timor. 2 Australians reported from Balibo. Portugal refused to help, 2 British and 1 Australian Fretilin. So it took the Timor diplomatic actions. The East proclaimed independence on November 28, 1975, to dissuade an assault from Indonesia. The UDT party launched the Balibo Agreement, an agreement between Opadsareechai and Indonesian made in Balibo. On December 8, 1975, the 2 political groups urged Indonesia for help, using the agreement as justification for an open military invasion. After firing on residents in Delhi city, Fretilin's forces fled into the forest. Soldiers from Indonesia stormed Delhi, Bokal, Liwaska, and Momara, slaughtering residents. Indonesians in Central Java are soulless and plunder businesses without mercy. Murder of the helpless, the UTD and Opadsareechai parties replaced the Fretilin troops on January 13, 1976. Armed invasions of East Timor foreign countries appear to have ignored Indonesia's, especially the world's or Asian countries. Perhaps they value Indonesia and have shared interests. In April 1976, Indonesian troops invaded East Timor, leaving barely 2,000 fledgling troops. Over half of fledgling fighters knew how to use weapons or were militarily interrelated. Post-colonial, the Sultan's administrations had improved people's lives. Independence brought a desire for ASEAN membership. The Indonesian army massacred the East Timorese. Aid organizations like the International Committee of the Race Course were banned for the first year. So there was the takeover of West Timor. Indonesia announced and implemented the Act of Integration by removing East Timorese residents. Around 80% of Timorese migrants are with fledgling, while the remaining 20% are with Indonesians and East Timorese seeking independence. Surveillance of self-government movement by Indonesian military. The new East Timor government, backed by Indonesia, controlled the coffee's export trade. East Timor's foresters, sandalwoods, and other business ventures controlled by Sukarno Skin, using East Timor government he founded. Inclusions of East Timor in Indonesia caused tension. Australia called Indonesia's action imperialist and requested its forces leave. For Timor-Leste, the UN approved on September 15, 1999, to create an international force. During May 2002 to May 2004, the UN supported Timor-Leste through the United Nations mission in East Timor. Interesting fact about Timor-Leste. Timor-Leste people come from Australia. Because of the country's proximity to Indonesia, many suspect that the people of Timor-Leste come from this territory. However, they are descendants from the Aboriginal people of Australia. Archaeological remains found in East Timor suggest the areas had been inhabited for at least 42,000 years, making the site one of the region's oldest sites of modern human activity. East Timor is one of 27 countries that doesn't have a single UNESCO World Heritage Site. It also doesn't have any properties on the tentative list of sites intended to be submitted for the nomination. They worship crocodiles, which are considered god of fertility. The crocodile is still used as an important symbol of handicrafts such as weaving. Before agriculture, farmers splash the blood of animals onto soil before digging up the soil to plant crops as an offering to the spirits of demons.